Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
No one expected Willie Nelson, the calm, soft-spoken country music legend, to lose his cool on The View. But when Joy Behar pressed him on his political stance, the studio went from polite laughter to dead silence in seconds. And by the end, Willie Nelson wasn't just defending himself, he was walking off the set, leaving the host stunned and the internet on fire. The cameras rolled, and the studio audience erupted into cheers as the familiar figure of Willie Nelson stepped onto the View stage. His weathered face carried that unmistakable easy smile, the kind that had charmed fans for decades. Dressed in his trademark black tee, worn jeans, and a red bandana tied around his head, Willie looked exactly as the world remembered him, a living icon of country music and American storytelling. "Willie Nelson, everybody!" Whoopi Goldberg called out, clapping as he took his seat at the table between her and Joy Behar. Willie tipped his head politely. "Good to be here, y'all." From the start, it felt like the producers wanted to give viewers a nostalgic treat. They played a quick montage of Willie's biggest hits, his Farm Aid performances, and even some vintage clips of him laughing with Johnny Cash. The crowd was warm, receptive, and clearly in the mood for a relaxed, feel-good interview. Joy Behar, leaning slightly toward him, started with what seemed like a harmless question. "Willie, you've been touring for decades. You've seen America change in ways most of us can only imagine. How do you keep your music so timeless in such a, let's just say, politically divided time?" Willie chuckled, a low, unhurried sound. "Well, I guess I just try to sing what's true to me. Music should bring folks together, not split 'em up." It was an answer straight from the Willie Nelson playbook, gentle, wise, and wrapped in a folksy charm. But Joy's eyes flickered, and she followed up with a sharper edge. "Sure, but you've also been, let's say, not shy about certain political stances. Do you ever worry you might be alienating your fans when you speak out?" The room didn't tense, not yet, but there was a subtle shift. Willie adjusted in his seat. "I figure if a man's got beliefs, he ought to stand by 'em. I'm not running for office, Joy. I'm just telling my truth." Whoopi quickly jumped in to keep things light. "And you've been doing that since before some of us at this table could walk." Laughter rippled across the room, but Joy didn't let it go. "Right, but when you endorse certain politicians or speak out on hot-button issues, some people might see that as divisive, not unifying. Don't you think musicians have a responsibility to, I don't know, stay out of politics?" Willie leaned back, crossing his arms loosely. His tone was still calm, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a flash of something that suggested he'd heard this question one too many times. "Joy, music and politics have been dancing together a long time. Woody Guthrie sang about the Dust Bowl, Bob Dylan sang about civil rights, and I sing about what matters to me. I don't think staying quiet helps anybody." The audience applauded, but it was a mixed clap, part appreciation, part anticipation, as if they sensed the conversation might be heading somewhere more charged. Sonny Hostin tried to pivot the discussion toward Willie's upcoming charity concert, but Joy circled back. "But don't you think in times like these, we need less of that kind of talk and more neutral ground? People come to your shows to relax, not to hear political speeches." Willie gave a small smile, but it wasn't the warm one from earlier. This one had steel in it. "I've been singing about freedom, fairness, and kindness since before you and I ever met. If folks don't like it, they don't have to listen. But I'm not about to stop speaking my mind because it makes some people uncomfortable." The audience clapped louder this time, and the applause had a different energy, almost like they were picking sides. The segment was still friendly on the surface, but the undercurrent was undeniable. Joy's posture had straightened, her eyes sharper, and Willie's easygoing demeanor now had a thread of defiance running through it. The stage was set. Somewhere in the control booth, A producer probably sensed it too. This wasn't going to stay polite for much longer. Willie Nelson leaned back in his chair, his weathered hands folded loosely on the table, that familiar gentle smile still painted across his face. But if you looked closely, and Joy Behar certainly was, you could see it tightening, like a guitar string being tuned just a hair too tight. Joy leaned forward, elbows on the table, that bright studio smile slipping into something sharper. "So, Willie," she said, voice carrying that playful edge that only half-masked the bite beneath, "you've been very vocal about your, let's just call them unconventional political stances. But don't you think, at some point, a public figure has a responsibility to align with what's best for the majority?" Willie tilted his head slightly, as though he were watching a storm roll in from a distance. "Well, Joy," he said slowly, his Texas drawl stretching the syllables like taffy, "I've been around a long time, long enough to see that what the majority wants changes every 10 years, sometimes every 2. I don't believe in chasing what's popular. I believe in sticking to what's right." The audience hummed with anticipation. The other hosts glanced between them, sensing the shift. Joy chuckled, but it wasn't the light, friendly laugh she'd opened with. "Sure, Willie, but when your right contradicts what experts and policymakers are saying is best for the country, doesn't that make you, well, part of the problem?" That smile on Willie's face didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I've seen policymakers get it wrong more times than they've gotten it right, and I've played for crowds in every state in this country. I know folks who don't get a say in what's best for the country because they don't have a lobbyist or a headline." The audience broke into light applause, but Joy wasn't backing down. "But Willie," she pressed, "that's romantic talk. Nice in a song lyric, but dangerous in practice. Politics isn't about stubborn individuality. It's about compromise, about moving forward together." Willie's smile faded just enough to reveal the steel underneath. "Compromise is fine, until it costs people their dignity, until it costs them their way of life. I'm not in the business of telling hard-working people to fall in line just because a TV panel or a think tank says so." Joy leaned back now, crossing her arms. "But Willie, you're using your platform to push ideas that could hurt the very people you claim to care about. Don't you see the contradiction there?" The tension was palpable. You could almost hear the producers in the control room whispering into headsets, "Stay on this! The ratings are spiking!" Willie took a breath, and his voice lowered, carrying a weight that made the audience lean in. "What I see is a lot of folks in power deciding for everyone else what's safe to talk about. And then people like me, people who've lived enough life to know better, get told to sit down and shut up. That's not the America I grew up singing about." Joy's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't look away. "That's the problem, Willie. You're still singing about the America you grew up in. But we're living in a different one now, one where the stakes are higher and where a single voice, especially a famous one, can do real damage." Willie's jaw tightened. The friendly back and forth from Act 1 was gone now. This was no longer a casual chat. It was a philosophical standoff live on national television. The audience wasn't just watching a disagreement. They were watching two icons, one of music, one of daytime television, strip away each other's public personas, piece by piece. And somewhere between Joy's sharp retorts and Willie's slow, deliberate rebuttals, the air in the studio changed. It wasn't about sound bites anymore. This had become personal. The laughter in the studio had thinned to a faint, nervous hum. Joy Behar sat forward in her chair now, her elbows on the table, eyes narrowing just slightly, a tell that any seasoned guest would notice. But Willie Nelson wasn't a politician or an actor worried about headlines. He was a man who'd spent his life speaking his mind through music, and he wasn't about to fold now. "Joy," Willie said slowly, leaning toward her, You keep saying we're talking about politics, but I'm talking about people. I'm talking about the farmer in Texas who can't keep his land because corporate interests bought out the water rights. I'm talking about the family in Ohio who can't afford health care for their kid because they're working 3 jobs and still barely scraping by. If caring about them is a political stance, then I guess I'm guilty. A few audience members clapped quietly, but Joy's hand shot up as if she were conducting a classroom. "Hold on, Willie," she countered. "Nobody's saying you can't care. But when you align yourself with certain movements that alienate a huge part of the population, you're making a choice to divide people. That's the problem." Willie chuckled softly, a sound that somehow felt both warm and tired. Divide people? Joy, people were already divided long before I opened my mouth. The difference is I'm not pretending that gap doesn't exist. Joy's voice sharpened. But you have a responsibility. You're an icon. Your words carry weight. You can either unite or you can inflame. And lately, it feels like you've chosen the latter. Willie's eyes dropped for a moment. The silence was thick enough to feel. Then he looked straight at her, really looked at her, and said, "I've spent 70 years writing songs about unity, about love, about the land we all share. And I've watched leaders on all sides use folks like me to sell an image of unity they never intended to deliver. I'm not here to sell an image. I'm here to tell the truth as I see it." Joy didn't flinch, but her co-host Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The audience didn't know whether to clap or hold their breath. Willie's voice grew quieter, more personal. "I lost friends in the music industry when I started speaking out in the 80s. I had shows canceled. Radio stations stopped playing my songs. And you know what? I didn't stop then, and I won't stop now. Because the moment you let fear dictate your voice, you stop being an artist. You stop being human." The applause was louder this time, but Joy cut in with a quick, almost biting, "And what happens when your voice does more harm than good?" Willie gave a sad smile. "That's the beauty of free will, Joy. You get to decide that for yourself, and I get to decide what I stand for." A long pause. The camera caught the tightness in Joy's jaw, the flicker in her eyes. It wasn't outright anger, more the bristling discomfort of someone realizing they'd underestimated their opponent's resolve. And in that moment, the room shifted. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was 2 visions of what an American icon should be colliding, live on television. Willie's tone softened one last time. "I'll tell you this. I'd rather walk off this set today knowing I stayed true to myself than sit here agreeing with you just so the segment feels safe." The audience erupted, not all in agreement, but undeniably electrified. And somewhere a producer in the control room was already whispering into their headset, "This is about to get messy."
The studio felt like it had been hit by a quiet thunderclap. Willie Nelson's boots had barely clunked past the cameras when Joy Behar exhaled a shaky laugh and said, "Well, I guess we found his line in the sand." The audience, unsure whether to clap, laugh, or stay silent, gave a scattered round of applause. Some chuckled nervously, others stared toward the wings where Willie had disappeared. The warmth that had filled the studio minutes earlier was replaced by a tense static in the air. Sunny Hostin tried to salvage the moment. "You know," she said gently, "these conversations can be hard, especially when you've lived through the things you believe in." She looked toward Joy, who was sipping her coffee like it was suddenly the most important prop on the table. "Oh, please," Joy said, waving a dismissive hand. "I've debated politicians, generals, and Hollywood hotshots. I didn't say anything outrageous. If he can't handle an opposing view, maybe he shouldn't—" She stopped mid-sentence when the producer's voice came over her earpiece, reminding her that millions were watching, including Willie's fiercely loyal fan base. In the control room, chaos was unfolding. Directors barked instructions. "Camera 3, stay on Joy. Camera 2, cut to Whoopi. Someone see if Willie's leaving the building or just taking a breather." Whoopi Goldberg finally stepped in. "All right, folks," she said in that calm but firm tone that could end bar fights. "Everyone's allowed their stance, and everyone's allowed to step away if they feel they've said enough. Let's keep the temperature down, shall we?" On social media, however, the temperature was spiking. Within minutes, hashtags like Willie walks out and Behar versus Nelson began trending. Clips of the moment, Willie's slow rise from his chair, the quiet way he adjusted his hat before walking off, spread like wildfire. Some framed him as a man of principle, refusing to be cornered. Others mocked him for running from a debate. At the commercial break, a frazzled stagehand slipped a note to Whoopi. "He's gone, left through the side door, no comment to press." Back at the table, the co-hosts scrambled to pivot. Sonny mentioned Willie's decades-long advocacy for farmers and environmental causes, trying to paint a broader picture of his life's work. Joy, though clearly irked, softened her tone. "Look, I respect the man. He's done more for music and for people than most, but we can't just nod along to every political stance because someone's a legend." When they returned from break, the atmosphere was noticeably muted. The show wrapped with a generic segment about fall recipes, but no one in the studio or watching at home was really paying attention. The real story had already left the building in a denim jacket and a cowboy hat. Outside, paparazzi caught a brief shot of Willie sliding into a black SUV, face unreadable behind his sunglasses. When asked why he walked off, he simply said, "Sometimes the best thing to say is nothing at all," and shut the door. By that evening, opinion pieces were popping up. Willie Nelson, hero or hypocrite, and when talk shows push too far. The moment was no longer just about a disagreement on political stances. It had become a litmus test for how America talks or doesn't talk about its deepest divides. And whether you sided with Willie or Joy, one thing was undeniable. The walk-off would be replayed, dissected, and argued about for years to come. The View's stage was still humming with residual tension even after Willie Nelson had disappeared through the studio doors. The audience, once a lively sea of chatter and laughter, sat in stunned silence, unsure if they had just witnessed a historic television moment or a slow-motion train wreck. Joy Behar shuffled her note cards with deliberate slowness, a faint smirk tugging at her lips as if she had won something, though no one was quite sure what. The camera cut to commercial quickly, but the internet did not. Within minutes, hashtags like Willie walks off, The View meltdown, and Let Willie speak trended across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Clips of Willie's calm but razor-sharp retorts and the final almost dignified removal of his mic were already racking up millions of views. Fans praised his patience, while critics accused him of storming off instead of engaging. But one thing was certain, people were talking. By the next morning, every outlet had their spin. Some headlines read, "Willie Nelson takes a stand, walks out on The View mid-interview." Others leaned the opposite way. Joy Behar holds ground in heated exchange with Willie Nelson. And of course, the late-night comedians couldn't resist. Willie left the set so fast I half expected him to hop on a tour bus and write 3 new protest songs before dinner. Willie's camp remained quiet for 24 hours, a strategic silence that made people lean in closer. When he finally spoke through a short video on his social media, it wasn't angry, it wasn't even defensive, it was pure Willie. Slow, deliberate, and heartfelt. He said, "I didn't walk off because I was angry. I walked off because sometimes the best way to finish a conversation is to stop talking and let folks think about what's been said." That line alone became a meme. Teachers used it in classrooms, activists printed it on signs, and fans shared it under every post related to civil discourse. What Willie had done, whether intentional or instinctive, was turn a heated clash into a broader discussion about respect, boundaries, and how to disagree without burning everything down. For Jo, the moment added another chapter to her long history of on-air confrontations. Lover or hater, she knew how to create television that stuck in people's minds. But for Willie, the moment became part of his legacy. It wasn't just about politics, it was about integrity, about knowing when to speak and when to leave. Weeks later, a journalist asked Willie if he regretted walking out. He just smiled and said no. You can't regret doing what your gut tells you is right. The real regret comes from ignoring it. And maybe that's why this clash wouldn't fade from public memory, because in an era where shouting often drowns out listening, Willie Nelson's quiet exit spoke louder than any argument could. If you liked this unforgettable moment, make sure to subscribe for more celebrity clashes, emotional showdowns, and the stories that leave you thinking long after the cameras stop rolling. Drop a comment below. Was Willie right to walk off, or should he have stayed and kept debating?